This episode was recorded during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Without the hard work of the writers and actors currently on strike, the works covered here would not exist. We fully support the WGA and SAG-AFTRA in their fight for fair treatment and compensation in a grossly unfair and outdated system. Having consulted the FAQs published by Variety, it clarifies that critics are not on strike and not obligated to stop reviewing movies and TV. The only restriction on podcasts is the same that applies to any medium. SAG-AFTRA members are not allowed to promote struck work. Though we're not members, we would like to state that any praise that constitutes part of our criticism applies to the artists, writers, and the actors who created these works. We would like to emphasise that we fully support these strikes and that writers, actors and other artists deserve fair compensation. We also want to see our favourite entertainment return, but we recognise that a fair deal is the only way forward. This podcast is not made with any studio-provided material, support or backing. Please see links in the episode description for ways you can help in the fight for fair treatment. We do not support any studios during these strikes. Ta-pa-ta-be. Ha 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 ha. Today, we are reviewing the movie Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. If you're watching on the Silver Screen channel, it'll be a cut-down version. If you're watching on Hit or Miss Star Trek, we won't have any of the usual stuff because we've got a big movie to talk about and a lot of guests, which will probably take up most of the time we would normally use. So, yeah, we're looking forward to this. We've been joined by the old crew, shall we say, the Discord crew, the A-team, the hosts. I don't know what we should call ourselves, but let me just start by introducing all of those and more. Let me start by introducing regular... Oh, dear Lord, no. Let me start by introducing regular co-host and David Hasselhoff superfan, DK.
Dieter Gross, Rien.
Ooh, what was that?
We're condemning foodstuffs.
Don't get me started on that scene. We'll get to that, I'm sure. And we are joined by I want to say the Discord dames, and hope that's not too offensive. So first of all, let me introduce Adrienne Park Tucker. Welcome back, Adrienne.
Hello, friends. I am here and happy.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. And of course, Sandra Evanson is joining us back as well.
Yes, hello. I'm so happy to be back discussing this film in particular.
Absolutely, and if you're on the visual medium of YouTube, you can see we've all picked our avatars. We've all clearly decided how much we like these individual parts of the film, so there's lots to talk about. We begin, as we often do on our film podcast, with the behind-the-scenes section. And much like Spock volunteering Kirk for the mission to the Klingons, I volunteered DK for this, and he and I both gathered as much BTS stuff as we could find, so there's quite a lot. Over to you. Do you want to start the behind-the-scenes section, and we'll see how long it takes?
Yeah, thanks, man. As usual, the majority of this will be known to most Trekkies out there, and there is just so much. So we've kind of gone for a less is more, even though there's tons of this stuff. So apologies if I've missed so much out, but if you're so inclined, I urge you to check out the extra stuff in you can. And bear in mind, for those that haven't seen it, there are also spoilers in this, so we've gone far beyond the moratorium for spoilers, I feel, but you never know. So with that in mind, if you're not bothered or don't want it ruined, it may be wise to skip ahead a few minutes. Well, I say a few minutes, it could be like 20. So I'll start off. Nicholas Meyer, the director, he was worried that Shatner would be upset at some of the lines written for the scene when Marty, disguised as Kirk, fights him. "I can't believe I kissed you. Must have been your lifelong ambition." There you go, Adrienne. However, Shatner reportedly loved this. Shatner was less enthused, however, with Nick Meyer for breaking a promise regarding one of his lines. The line in question was when Kirk says, "Let them die," during the scene when he and Spock are talking after the classified briefing. Shatner wanted to say the line, then gesture as if he didn't mean to say this, and he made Meyer promise to show this on camera. However, in the final cut, after Kirk says, "Let them die," it just cuts to Spock looking surprised and only goes back to Kirk, cutting over when Kirk gestures with regret. Now, a subplot to this film was to show that even in the 23rd century, humans hadn't totally shed their bigotries and prejudice. James Doohan had a line about "that Klingon bitch," but Nichelle Nichols refused to say this in reference to the Klingons. "Yeah, but would you let your daughter marry one of them?" The line was dropped because she refused to say it. According to Nicholas Meyer, Brock Peters found Admiral Cartwright's words during the briefing scene to be so offensive he needed several takes to get them all out. And in a similar vein, Nichelle Nichols also refused to speak the line, "Guess who's coming to dinner?" an intentional reference to the 1967 Sidney Poitier movie, which is heard before the Klingons' visit to the Enterprise. The line was instead given to Walter Koenig. Yep. Now, the blue blood found at the dinner scene was so disgusting that actors had to be bribed to eat it. Each actor was offered $20 for every bite. Shatner did it and won $240 before throwing up. According to Leonard Nimoy, it was chunks of squid treated with blue food colouring. Reportedly, Shatner was the only member of the cast able to swallow any of it, and the first time Shatner ate the coloured squid, he turned and looked right at Nick Meyer and said, "Where's my 20?" Meyer called cut and pulled out the 20 and gave it to Shatner. Now, although this is the final Star Trek film to feature the entire original series cast, only Nichelle Nichols and DeForest Kelley make their final official appearances in this film. Chan's demand, "Don't wait for the translation, answer me now," is a reference to Adlai Stevenson's similar demand of Soviet Union Representative Valerian Zorin at the United Nations during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, according to George Takei, it was supposed to be the Excelsior that takes the bird of prey, hence the Chartian Gaseous Anomalies mission referenced in the prologue. Shatner apparently objected and wanted the Enterprise to heroically save the day, hence the line being switched. Now, originally, The Undiscovered Country was a possible title for Star Trek II. The actual Shakespeare quote alluded to death, not the future. The Praxis effect was revolutionary and went on to be used multiple times, including famously for the destruction of the Death Star in the Star Wars special editions, as well as, I believe, the Stargate movie. The welcome speech that Kirk, McCoy and the other new prisoners receive upon arriving at Rue de Pente is a homage to the speech made by Colonel Saito to the British POWs from the bridge on the River Kwai. And the chorus heard in the background of many scenes on the soundtrack, mainly those on Rura Pente, say to be or not to be in Klingon.
Yeah, that's cool. We know a little bit more, hopefully, about Star Trek 6 now, or at least we were, enjoying hearing fascinating stuff that we knew before. So yeah, as I said, we're gonna go into our usual breakdown, and as we often do on both of our podcasts, we're gonna break this into sections rather than break down the film sort of scene by scene, because it's assumed that you've seen it. So without any more waffling from me, I'm going to jump into the first section, which I wanted to start with the writing and the plot, because there's quite a lot to say here. So the first thing is, there's some debate about whose idea this was, but the movie is quite obviously a Cold War allegory. They phrased it as, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the writers decided to drop the Berlin Wall in space, which was the Klingon neutral zone, and kind of address that. They also mentioned that the Praxis destruction was kind of an oblique reference to Chernobyl and how that had kind of crippled the communist Soviet Republic, as it were, at that time. So not something I picked up on as a kid, but it's an interesting thing to look at now. And I'm curious if any of you guys kind of picked up on these allegories or saw any of this like throughout the film, and what you make of it. Let's see. We haven't heard from you in a while, so we'll go to you, Adrienne, I guess.
Oh, yeah, quite clearly especially like right away with the red costume when Gorkon walked in. I was like, oh yeah, they're really trying to set up the color scheme and stuff like that. The bad guys. I thought that was pretty cool.
The red,
and those shoes, fabulous.
Yeah, yeah, the shoes. I mean, it just, it really, really, I love that costume. I mean, I feel like we could talk about the costume the whole time, but I thought right away with the setting up the colors that it was kind of like a Soviet thing. I like that.
For sure, yeah, it was definitely the Klingons as kind of communists, I suppose, and along with, as I said, some of the racial overtones that I'm sure we'll get more into that were quite uncomfortable for certain members of the cast and can be uncomfortable to watch in places as well.
Yeah, so, as they should have been. There's a really uncomfortable line with the bad guys saying even the top of the line models can even talk. I was like, that's just so bad.
Yeah. that's one of many. But as I say, we'll probably get to that when we hit up the actual instances. But one thing I didn't kind of put in the behind the scenes thing that I did want to mention in terms of this allegory is that supposedly the makeup on David Warner for Gorkon is designed to invoke both Gorbachev, reinforcing this allegory, but also Abe Lincoln to kind of reinforce the, I guess, idea of peace and
the spirit, especially
unifying.
Yeah, and the name Gorkon was Gorbachev and Lincoln.
Oh,
Gorkon.
my mind is blown right now.
Yeah, I read that during the research as well.
Yeah, that's just so cool.
Oh, wow.
I it's really and they thought it would be so obvious that at first they didn't want to try it, but see, still people didn't know. Isn't that awesome?
That blows my mind. Even though when I read about the makeup thing, I didn't put together that was the name. But wow, awesome.
Regarding that, I did also notice that it went a little bit further too when they were talking about are we going to dismantle the entirety of Starfleet, and they said no, that it will continue on. And I do remember that there was discussions back then about pulling back on military funding because the biggest threat was neutralized. They were our friends now. And so, and of course there was the old guard who were absolutely terrified at the thought of that and any sort of change. So it kind of the allegory continued on.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we still see that now. A lot of the old guard are terrified of particularly like the communism or any kind of alternate political view and stuff. But again, we'd be here all day talking about that, and we'd end up talking about everything that's got nothing to do with this movie, I suspect. But it's kind of, it's, I guess, sad but fitting how timely it still is, because you can still look at this and apply it to a lot of things, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, I did note as well that I wasn't really around, or wasn't at least, compos mentis enough to know what was going on in the world. At that time, I was only about 9 or 10 years old, so I wasn't aware if this was true or not, but I kind of made a note that they mention the Klingons can't sort of save themselves from this environmental disaster because all of their money goes towards their military budget. And I was like, is that something that was kind of true of the communist republics at the time, maybe? You guys would know better than me.
It was alluding, I believe, to Chernobyl with regards to,
And certainly the oligarchy was part of why it affected them so badly.
Yeah.
Plus the change.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, you said it. I did want to bring up one thing that actually came up in a conversation that I had with Sandra probably like a day ago before I watched the movie, which is that you said, Sandra, you didn't remember Star Trek 6 being quite so funny. And I said I did, so I'd actually made like a note, specifically like a little section of all of the moments when I was like, it's surprising to me that there's a really light touch and some good comic relief, like literally the relief is the word in this kind of what could be a heavy movie. And so I was curious if you had anything you wanted to bring up about it first, because I don't want to step on what you've got. So thank you for that.
I did write down some of those moments. Some of them not necessarily intentionally, but in the very beginning, when they're called to that top secret conference, they don't know why they're there, and when Kirk sees Spock is there, he looks betrayed from the very beginning, but when he learns that he was volunteered for the mission, and Spock says, I personally vouch for you, and he says, you personally vouched for me? It was just so funny, and it carried so much betrayal and passion behind it. But that was one moment that I thought was really funny. I have so many notes here, and I wish I had pulled them out by things that I thought were.
I'll go around if you want and ask the others as well, because they may have something that they wanted to kind of chuck in and contribute that specifically is memorable to them. So, Adrienne, do you have anything that springs out as like a particularly funny moment that you see that gave you like a good moment of relief, or that you actually thought was just a really cool joke or hilarious moment?
Well, this would have been part of my my appreciation of the directing was transitioning. There's some funny transitioning moments, but I guess the funniest one to me when I saw in the theater, because I laughed out loud, and I still do, is when Spock is like, well, if I know James Kirk, he's planning his escape, and cuts immediately to the brawl in Urabhente prison,
Right.
where he's literally just been punched. So that gives me, that gives me the
That's
happy.
cool. I didn't
That's a
even
funny
I didn't
scene,
even
yeah.
think about that, because I didn't
Yeah.
think of registering it with the direction. But you're absolutely right. It is a lot of and one of the things that I've got down as writing, I suppose, is technically kind of direction as well, which is the idea that they're going to reveal everything to Kirk just as he's getting beamed up, and he's basically swearing the entire way through the transporter beam, and then just gets there and he's like, Spock, you couldn't have waited 2 more seconds, and just
Right.
the glorious, would you like to go back? No, it's cold.
Well, it would have been cool to see in the script, like how they wrote this out, like the part where Bones, he's a funny character. I mean, he has all of his lines, but when he's asked during the trial, how are you or whatever, and
what health are you in? Or
what health are you in? And then, and he's like, oh, I'm doing, aside from a little arthritis, and there's one Klingon that laughs, up in the stands during the trial, and I thought that was kind of cool. I like to see
it's
how
the way that McCoy responds, like he's actually like a stand-up comedian getting.
Yeah, he's looking up there. I have a fan. No, you don't. You're going to. Yeah, they want to kill you.
McCoy is great in this movie, especially really for that particular comic relief. Yeah,
they gave him a lot of really good lines, and you just need them because it's kind of some heavy aspects to this film.
Yeah.
One McCoy line I liked was when they were first arriving there on Ruapente, and he runs into that really tall alien. He says, "Oh my God!" And the alien's just getting more and more agitated. And McCoy goes, "He's definitely on about something, Jim."
Right?
Yeah. Exactly. And we acted it out before recording, but yeah, just that hilarious scene of Kirk saying, I'm lucky that thing had knees. That wasn't his knee. Not everyone has their genitals in the same place. And Kirk just basically telling McCoy, go and see if you can do anything for them and let them know we don't hold a grudge. And McCoy's like, well, suppose they hold a grudge. So again, just little exchanges like that, which just give you, it's right off the back of a particularly kind of tense fight, and it just gives you that extra bit of levity and kind of, I don't know, fun that keeps things moving along, I guess. So yeah, DK, over to you. Anything that springs out to you about these moments?
It's McCoy, and it's not so much the line, it's just the delivery. Towards the end of the movie, where Chang's just constantly quoting Shakespeare, and McCoy said, I'd just give real money if he'd just shut up.
Oh, yeah, that's such a stressful scene when they're doing the surgery on the torpedo. That's a really good one.
I do like it as well, where Spock says, "Would you assist me?" and McCoy goes, "Fascinating." I did like that. And
I was just going to reference that.
It's not McCoy related, and it's pure panto, and it's played for laughs. But the Russian Epic of Cinderella scene.
Are you familiar with Russian Epic of Cinderella? If the shoe fits, and then crewman Dax just has massive feet that would never fit into boots. Yeah,
I really like Dax. He seemed like such a good kid. I really want more of that particular Dax.
I should clarify, by the way, that it's already been addressed that this is not a previous host of the Dax symbiont from DS9.
Right.
Just a coincidence, because people automatically leapt to that fan conclusion. So that's had to be shot down, unfortunately. Fair enough.
Yet another McCoy line was when they were in the bunk beds, and the shapeshifter played by Iman, she kisses him, and then when she leaves, McCoy's like, "What is it with you anyway?" Kirk says, "You still think you're finished?" More than ever.
Yeah, exactly.
It's incredibly quotable, this film.
Anything else that has come up from you, Sandra? I'll give you a chance to look through, see if you could pull some notes maybe before I go into mine. I did pull
2 more out, and then I'd like to hear yours. I hope I don't steal any more of yours.
That's fine. I have quite a lot. So.
Oh, good. I thought it was hilarious at the diplomatic function when they were all unfolding their napkins, and it just basically looked like an infomercial for cloth napkins. Like none of the Klingons were. One guy even dropped it for like no apparent reason. He just couldn't hang on to the delicate cloth or something. Yeah. I thought that was pretty funny. And then the other part was another kind of subtle thing, kind of like the one Klingon laughing at McCoy's joke when the shapeshifter there in the elevator going up to the mines, and she says, because they don't allow women. And then she turns and she goes, just that one chuckle there in the elevator.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but really funny. What did you
Exactly.
find, Mike? I'm excited to hear.
Well, just a lot of things that I said kind of helped. Some of them aren't like obvious jokes, but I think they just added to the levity. So anything from like the idea of drinking Romulan ale, and then Kirk, when he's giving his kind of our manners weren't exactly Emily Post log, immediately just cuts into, by the way, note to the galley, Romulan ale no longer to be served at diplomatic functions. It's just such a little cool moment. Or on a similar note, when they get back to the bridge and they're like, you picking up any kind of strange neutrino type emissions, Chekhov? And you're like, only the size of my head. Chekhov is also, he gets almost nothing to do, but all of his lines are kind of like gold when he does get them and kind of knocks it out of the park. I like the idea that they're so clueless about what Valeris is talking about when they're like, oh, we're being ordered back to Starfleet. And then she gives them that whole, back in the day, people threatened by industrialization threw their wooden shoes called sabo into machines, hence the word sabotage. And then she's like, oh, yeah, ship's completely damaged. And Chekhov says, oh, great. I mean, oh, too bad.
Yeah.
And likewise, when Scotty later is like, Mr. Scott, the warp drive is not functioning. How long will it take? There's nothing wrong with the bloody thing. Mr. Scott, if we get sent back, we won't be able to help. And he's like, oh, could take weeks, sir. Let's see. I've mentioned most of those other ones. You've already mentioned it. But then again, the other brilliant one, and I'm hoping I'm not stealing anybody's favorite line for when we get to it, but again, it's McCoy, of course it is, at the very end of the movie. Once again, we've saved civilization as we know it, and the good news is they're not going to prosecute. It's just such a nice sly reference to the way that they saved the world in Star Trek 4 and then immediately got put on trial. But anyway, awesome, cool. So that'll handle the kind of comedic side of things. I wanted to switch it up a little bit and go to the kind of the scenes that we alluded to earlier, the heavy scene where they basically arrive, meet the Klingon ship, Kronos 1, and they beam them onto the ship for dinner, and things get very tense. So before, again, I go into any of my notes about that, I don't want to step on any toes. Do any of you want to jump in? Any thoughts on that particular, everything like I said, from arriving to the ship to the Klingons beaming away and everyone being a bit exhausted by it?
I think that David Wagner coming in as Gorkon in that first scene, at first you're kind of like, oh man, he's suspicious. But, for me personally, I got a good feeling about the character, a good feeling about his intentions. But because at the end, when he says, I can see we have a long way to go. Mm-hmm. I think his whole existence in this movie, I thought was great.
Oh yeah, I mentioned that when we get to the acting, so I'll save it for when we get there for my praise for Warner. But in terms of writing for the character, as you can see, I really love the line because it hits home very powerfully about the themes of the movie when he goes to Kirk after the dinner, just before they beam out, and just goes,
"You don't trust me, do you? I don't blame you. If there is to be a brave new world, our generation is going to have the hardest time living in it."
Now, like, there speaks a full-on statesman, really, doesn't it? Who's understood the idea, and it's not going to be easy, but
and you wouldn't think it would be a Klingon that's so diplomatic. So that is just honestly a good person. Or not person.
And related to that, I mean, I think that basically adds so much to when Kirk says, when he and Spock are both lamenting their mistakes, as it were, and Kirk just says, Gorkon had to die before I realized how prejudiced I was. And you genuinely sense regret from Shatner in that performance bit. Again, not to get too far just into acting, but I was like, you can see why Gorkon in years to come would have both Federation and Klingon ships named after him for being this kind of architect of peace, Really was. That's just a nerdy Trek kind of thought about that anyway. So, there's, as I said, a lot of kind of uncomfortable racial overtones that I don't think I noticed as a kid, which now are kind of very on the knuckle, including, as mentioned, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which was given to Chekhov because Nichelle Nichols understandably didn't want to say it. But also, I think it's just when they beam aboard and the two crewmen who ultimately end up doing the sabotage just say like, oh, they all look the same, and oh, the smell and everything, and I'm like, this is just really uncomfortable for me, because you don't want to think of Starfleet being that like bigoted. But I also didn't notice that I presume it's the same two people that Valeris basically recruits, because she bumps into them there and is like, don't you have work to do? And I was like, if you're paying attention to the like mystery of this thing, you could easily work out that she basically recruited them because she's like, you agree with our purpose? Well, here we go. This is what we're going to do. We're going to beam aboard the ship and blah, blah, blah. So then, of course, kills them.
Yeah, same guys.
I do love the logic she displays later on at that, where she says, plus they conspired with us to kill their own chancellor. How trustworthy can they be?
Yeah, exactly.
Like an insurrection, the rebels, bad rebels.
When it was right after that, though, when she bumped into them, when they were saying those horrible things that they all look alike, only the top of the line models can talk. And then in that next scene, it's showing how I don't think they were trying on purpose so hard, or maybe they were trying to prove that they were cultured by taking something that was revered in human Earth culture and showing that they maybe even had a better understanding of the material or a better grasp of the material than the humans did themselves, which was also a little bit pompous. But it's almost like they were trying too hard to prove themselves, that they weren't just what their entourage was, which was the guys who couldn't even hold on to a cloth napkin, and they certainly weren't, quoting Shakespeare, which I also thought was interesting, given the different ridge pattern and basic structure of the makeup they used on Chang and Gorkon, as opposed to the rest of the retinue or everybody in the court later, all the rest of the Klingons in the court later that grunt, so to speak.
I do know the reason for it when it comes to General Chang is because Christopher Plummer basically said he would only take the role if they agreed that he would have minimal Klingon makeup on, which is why there's barely anything. It's like the eye patch and a little ridge right at the top of the head. So yeah, he didn't want to be in makeup for hours on end, basically.
An eye patch nailed straight into the skull, mind you.
Yeah, bolts, leather and bolts.
Exactly. Wow. But did you notice as well, because this is something I never noticed, even watching in high definition, but supposedly if you look close enough, the 3 pins that hold the eye patch in all have the Klingon insignia carved in.
Didn't. No, that's your 4K, man.
I didn't even see it. It was just I read about it and I was like, the makeup or whoever it was, the props guy did it, and it was never intended to be seen by anybody. It was just like a kind of like fun labor of love type thing. I'll just do this. But yeah, just a weird little touch. I was like, okay, that's cool.
You say, oh shit.
It's like nobody walked away from this exchange changed in any way. If anything, maybe even more entrenched. Although Kirk does have, his little soliloquy right after where he admits their own fault and why it went so badly.
Yeah, I think Kirk grows the most, during this film, and I love his arc in this film. But again, I don't want to step on things I might be saying a little bit later. But I mean, yeah, to your point, they kind of even emphasize that, because Spock is kind of the neutral observer that when they start like bitching about the Klingons almost, and Uhura's like, did you see the way they were acting? Oh, no table manners. And Spock's like, I doubt that we would have, I doubt we would have dignified ourselves particularly well in the annals of history either. And, for a Vulcan, that's probably the level of frustration you'll get. But you can tell inside he's kind of like, none of us came out of that particularly well. Why can't you get on? So, yeah, I do kind of like the tenseness of the scenes when you kind of see that all the heads of state, as it were, are being advised to basically go to war. And everybody's telling them to do this, and they have to be both the Federation president and the Klingon chancellor at various times. It's just like, there's never going to be a better time. If we strike, we can do it. So that you really feel like these peace talks are hanging by a thread.
And that kind of alludes to that one time when something had happened in the missile launch system, and it appeared as if the United States had launched an attack against the Soviet Union, and only this one singular cool head prevailed and stopped all-out war from happening.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that, but that's intriguing. So that has a real-world kind of allegory as well. Yeah. Awesome.
Only just now thought of that.
So many layers to I do like the kind of mystery aspect and the way that it's Spock who kind of sorts out, by quoting Sherlock Holmes, sorts out, there must be a bird of prey that can fight well cloaked, and we have to get to the bottom of this, and we've got to identify the assassins. They'll have these boots that must still be here. And, I kind of like that it turns into almost a little bit of a detective story for a while there, because it all makes sense, and it doesn't seem like there's anything silly in those scenes. So I kind of just love Spock when he's being Spock and doing cool things and sciencing. So
and literally quoting Sherlock. Yeah. So it's very much the detective story. Yeah.
I think by this point we pretty much got to a point with the movies where they were all kind of space adventures, with the exception being like, Voyage Home's comedy aspect. But this, you go from a political thriller, it's a whodunit, as well as the space adventure, and I love that. There's so many layers on this one.
Absolutely, that's what I mean. There's there's like a comedy, a detective story, a kind of political. I don't know what the word is, but sort of along the lines of Captain America: The Winter Soldier was praised for being like a political thriller, I guess. There's hints of that in there as well, and as you say, there is still a good bit of like space action and starship fights and stuff at the end. So, yeah, awesome stuff. Let me see. So, any other thoughts about these kind of the mystery and the way that plays out from any of you?
I just thought that it was interesting from the very beginning, and this has already been touched on a few times, how when you go back on rewatch, just seeing how the various parties were pushing everything towards war, towards, they chose violence in every situation, and how those cooler heads did kind of prevail. But how, going back watching it, you see all these players doing that where it didn't even occur to you in first watching. That's very superb writing.
Yeah, and I'll mention it later when we get to it, but that's even more enhanced in the kind of extended cut, because that is basically the scenes are just, go to war, we're going to have to do it. But yeah, anyway, I can't think what else. Oh, there's a couple of things that I wanted to make note of, because I just found them a little weird, and I wasn't sure if you guys noticed or cared or had any thoughts on it. And the first one is Kirk's log when they are on trial. And they play the log about, I've never trusted Klingons because of the death of his boy. It's weird to me, and I always noticed this from the first viewing, that log isn't the same quote that he gave at the start of the movie. It's slightly, but importantly different. Like, I think in the original quote, he says, I've never trusted Klingons, I never will. I could never forgive them for the death of my boy. And in the one that they play at the trial, he says, I have never been able to forgive them for the death of my boy. And I'm like, is this a hint that this is doctored in some way, or is it just like the filmmakers forgot the line, or what?
I don't think I've ever picked up on that.
Yeah, it's weird, because I kind of get the whole idea that the hint is, well, somebody has to have got that log, and that's how Kirk works out, like, Valeris, how long were you waiting outside? But I was like, it's not even the same quote. And am I supposed to notice and care about that, or is it just one of those things I'm supposed to put down to the director not remembering or whatever? I don't know. I did like that there were things related to the detective story aspect. There were moments that you could pick up that might have been hints to things. So even Martia, when she's talking about, she's obviously led them out and betrayed them, the shapeshifter, and they're talking about, these things and what are you and everything. And she says, I thought I would assume a pleasant shape, which is a Shakespeare quote. Is that a hint that she's working with Chang? Could you potentially have picked up on that early and been like, aha, I see what that is? Or again, is it just a matter of, well, we've got enough Shakespeare in the film, let's chuck a bit more?
Anyway. See, I didn't pick up on that either.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I've just had to read too much Shakespeare in my English. Right. I have to mention this because it comes up. I know it comes up in the audience response section, and it's always bugged me as well. I really don't like that they make Uhura look really inept with not understanding Klingon. Like, that's the whole
horrible.
job.
Yeah, Michelle really didn't like that either.
So unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah, I did read, and Michelle just didn't want to do it and really fought against it. And I get the humor aspect, and I get, like, you're having to not rely on Universal Translator. But again, that's Uhura's whole job.
Yeah,
like
it would have been so cool if she just answered back and it was her accent or something that she was worried about.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a scene in one of the reboot movies where Zoe Saldana's Uhura does actually speak perfect Klingon. And I'm sure there's probably plenty of scenes in Strange New Worlds of the Celia Rose Gooding Uhura doing it. So now it seems like even more jarringly like, why did you have to make the character look silly here? But
and again, a disservice to her.
Absolutely, especially for the last sort of appearance,
But at least in the very beginning, when all the guys were talking about boats and retirement, she was talking about chairing a seminar at
Symposium.
the university. Yeah, that was good at least.
Absolutely. I did love Scotty's line there as well. Maybe they're going to retire us early. Oh, it suits me. I've just bought a boat.
Yeah, it's the way they say them sometimes. It just comes across as hilarious because you're so familiar with the characters by this point. They're like a family kind of thing.
Yeah, I said that. I think the film does rely a lot on kind of your awareness of these characters and your kind of comfort and familiarity with them. Because I do wonder how you would kind of respond to it if this was the first thing you'd seen, and I doubt it would have the same kind of impact because
especially the subtle humor, especially
Yeah.
McCoy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What did you think about the idea of this? Seems a little simplistic to me, but the idea that they basically entrap Valeris by saying we're taking notes from these two people who you think you've killed.
Oh my God, that was terrible. Since when do they ever explain why they need someone to go somewhere over the speakers? The fact that she fell for this is highly illogical.
Well, they did mention that they needed it to be a court reporter or stenographer or something because they needed to take official legal statements, which I guess would kind of make sense.
But then they had to say the two persons' name, official legal statements of this person and this person. Yeah. That was exactly, over the top.
And it does kind of stand out that Valeris really wouldn't be dumb enough to not think this could potentially be a trap. But, I kind of forgive it just for the sheer awesomeness of the scene that follows, particularly with Spock and how absolutely betrayed he is. And he actually lets out genuine display of anger.
Emotion. He can't control it for a minute there.
Yeah, the slapping away of the phaser is just like, whoa.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. Right. So the last thing I have on my notes with regard... Well, I have a couple of things. First of all, I kind of have to bring it up even though I don't like it because it's probably my least favorite part of the movie, but the kind of forced mind meld on Valeris to get the answers, it's really uncomfortable and it's not especially because it's Spock, who's like my favorite character, and it's just incredibly invasive, and I don't like that this was the only way. The last note I have on the writing is just, what do you guys make of the ending? Because I personally think just beautiful and so fitting the way that they end this movie in the last scenes. And again, I don't want to step on any toes. And Adrienne, you've been very quiet, so are you available to tell us what you think of the very end of the movie?
I love the ending. I love all our folks being together and being happy. I'm glad that they did it that way. Of course, that's how every Star Trek movie ends, basically. But
not quite in the same way. I mean, the way that this is, the sense of awe and like we've been programmed, we've been ordered to go back and, second start of the right straight on till morning, and Kirk's final log, it gets me emotional every time. He
says that they're turning over the Enterprise to a different crew. I'm just like, oh, yeah.
The allusion to Next Generation is a huge fan of that show as well. The way that he's we'll be entrusting our legacy to a new crew, and they'll go to all these places, and we'll go when no one has gone before. Like,
touching and beautiful. Yeah, wonderful.
It is. It's beautiful and quite fitting. So, any thoughts on that from you then, Sandra?
I thought the conversation that they had, and just the turning over of everything and their discussion. I'm trying to remember what they say at the very end, but they're just their discussion about, how things need to change and how they're maybe been part of the problem. And then, of course, the very end where he changes where no man has gone before to where no one has gone before, and kind of turning it over to this new generation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, obviously in universe they're not alluding to the Enterprise D; it would be the Enterprise B. But I think us, metatextually, we as the audience knew this was a reference to, okay, this is the last time you'll see this crew. We're now passing on to the next generation, and that show had already started, but it was very much we are now officially passing the torch, and it was a nice way to do it. I think quite fitting and quite beautiful. DK, any thoughts from you on that?
Well, as I say now, everything from that, if I were human, to the sign-off, that's my favourite scene of this.
Yeah, and I do love the little touch as well that Avengers Endgame later copied of the main cast's signatures appearing on the screen. Yeah. And Lower Decks copied it for humour value as well, as I recall. Okay. Any thoughts on any of the writing then before I shuffle us along a bit?
I just think it's really good in this one. Obviously, coming off the back of the previous one, it's so much of a step up. It's, as I said,
really is.
Yeah, there's no real lull in it. There's nothing that, it's got the odd scene that people might not like, but it doesn't drag it down. Going back to the previous one,
it really flows well. Really flows.
I see a lot of this in my conclusion, which is it's kind of I feel vindicated in the way that I'm not just imagining this, so not biased to like the film, because I felt that much the same way. I was like, there's not really. It doesn't feel like at any point you're just like, oh, I've got to get through this scene to get to the next bit or whatever. It's all kind of cool and it all paces really well and everything. But yeah, related to that, then I want to move.
I liked that in the beginning, they, besides having all of the quotes from Shakespeare, I read that he started the whole movie with the exploding of Praxis. And that was just like the lightning strike in the very beginning of Hamlet, because it pulled everybody's attention in from the very beginning.
Yeah. I haven't really mentioned that, but it was a fantastic way to start by just playing the musical overture, I guess, that opens the movie, and then immediately fading from the music to just bang is such a shock, and it really does wake you straight up into the, oh, okay, what's this of the movie. We've mentioned it before, but I think it's more effective than opening with just like a flyby of the ship and captain's log, blah, blah, blah. I was like, no, you immediately show the blowing up moon. That gets the attention. Then you cut to the ship kind of thing. So, yeah. So I wanted to move us along to the next section, but I'm going to hand it over to you, DK, because I've been talking for way too long. So did you want to lead the discussion on the direction of the movie, if you don't mind?
Yeah. I mean, you've already kind of, it's already been kicked off, really, with that opening. So, directing wise, I think it's another admirable job with regards to Nick Meyer. Obviously, it wasn't to everybody's tastes in the cast and behind the scenes. But what do you guys think of that?
I really did like the direction of it. I feel like a lot of their own self-direction came through the movie, and that may have had something to do with them kind of really getting the feeling that this was going to be their last movie together, the last TOS movie. But I feel like they kind of directed themselves through a lot of it, through the humor, and they knew their characters very well by then. Other aspects of the direction as it pertained to people not in the crew and what was going around, I felt like it was very true to the series. Always did, what was going on in the background, what the extras were doing was always very appropriate and not odd. So I thought, everything went very smoothly, but I wasn't really sure what his specific contributions were.
That's fair enough. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, similar. I think I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Nicholas Meyer's view of Starfleet, because he has this very, I guess, militaristic view of it. And a lot of that comes through in some of the dialogue, like mentioning if we are getting rid of the space stations and bases along the neutral zone, are we getting rid of Starfleet? And them having to point out, no, we're all about peaceful exploration, which is something that should go without saying for me. But at the same time, there is something undeniably cool about like little touches, like just how lived in the ship feels, because every background character has a role and they're doing something, and that from the galley to the bridge, everyone has a function, and it all seems to be ship shape, so to speak. So it kind of looks cool in that regard, having that level of military discipline, I suppose. And yeah, I think, as you said, the director in this one is he's working with actors, two of which at least have directed movies in this franchise, so the acting in that regard, I think a lot of the actors are kind of doing their own thing. I do wonder how much direction Nick Meyer actually had to give the main cast, like Sandy was alluding to. They know the characters well enough anyway that it seems like you could basically just be like, I'm going to focus on visuals and stuff, and I know you guys will nail whatever I give you, so just do the performance thing as second nature almost.
Yeah, I think if there were any problems, it's basically come down to the actors know the characters to some extent better than Nick Meyer does. So, so when he's directing them to do something that they don't want to do, that isn't in character, such as the scene with the horror or the lines that they're given, you just can't blame them for that. They've inhabited this role for so many years that you kind of think, yeah, all right, Nick, you're not doing yourself any favors here. Having said that, I do think it's directed incredibly well, and I do like the fact that, like Ratha, to some extent, he goes against that. When ships are facing each other, they always have to be on the same plane, kind of thing. I think we spoke about this the other day in the animated review.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I do like the fact that when they're battling each other, they are. It does feel very much like a 3D situation.
Well, even when you think about it, the actual solution to the problem is the bird of prey was underneath us, which seems like obvious, but it's like, how many times would people be like, "Oh, we didn't realize he could be above or below," or whatever? So
yeah, well, I mean, for 20 odd years, everybody's been facing each other. So it might get to the point where shit.
Like along the x-axis too.
Exactly. They're not thinking three-dimensionally, as Spock would say.
Exactly. Yeah.
One thing that was cool, and I just remembered it, was how they did the lack of universal translator scene in court. How first he was speaking Klingon, and how that transitioned to English, which we've seen before, of course, but it was just really cool here.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I really like the transitions, but I also liked a lot of the interesting shots, especially of Christopher Plummer, because like how he's looking up in the camera and he's like, "You guys did this to us," and I like that there's kind of other than normal angles to a lot of the scenes. And I loved how we mentioned it earlier, but how Leonard Nimoy really stepped into leadership with Spock. He has to take charge, big time, take charge of everything. And it's like this huge big deal because it's, that what's going to happen in the universe. He
covers the Enterprise longer than Kirk does, if you think about it, in the runtime of the movie.
Yeah, that he really steps into leadership. And I liked how they set that up.
Yeah.
Nice. One of the things that bugs me, I would say it's more an editing problem than a direction problem. But I noticed it when I first watched it, because I'd seen some behind the scenes on that making of video. So when they first end up on Rura Penthe, and that scene with he wants your allegiance to the Brotherhood of Aliens. There's where they come in and he says, he starts pushing Kirk around, and McCoy says, "He's definitely on about something, Jim."
Yeah.
The way it's edited so the audio's playing, but McCoy's mouth isn't moving because they've cut to a different thing, and that always bugs me because when I saw the making of, it showed that scene as it was filmed, and then it's just really jarring now, and it has been ever since. It's just a minor thing, one of my little OCD things, but yeah, that really
bad ADR. Like they asked him to re-record it and they haven't synced it up properly.
Yeah. But that's pretty much all I've got with regards to the direction.
Yeah, I don't have much. I'll quickly go through the stuff that I have, which is just to say I liked the direction of the anti-gravity scene, the sense of chaos that you actually get, which would be exactly how it would go. The Klingons floating
very
all over the place.
Chaos. Yeah,
absolutely. But there is the sense of like they can't fight back, if you know what I mean. So they're just bewildered as to what's going on.
And helpless.
But no, I think there is a sense of like a kind of a chaos, I guess, to like not being able to see their face and just weapons fire randomly going off, somebody losing an arm, blood floating about everywhere.
And it's running as reddish pink as ever.
Which is why the Klingons are compensating for something. They're bright pink, hot pink blood.
Which only ever was the case in this and now one episode of Lower Decks. But yeah. So I like that sort of scenes. I think the tenseness of the Rura Penthe scenes is very well done. Shout out to W. Morgan Shepherd for a great little cameo role as the intendant of that gulag.
Yeah, he ate up his scenes, didn't he? He really did.
Really,
he's such a great, was such a great character actor.
Yeah, he really shined in that role.
Yeah.
Well, or the opposite of shine if you're a Klingon.
He was intimidating, definitely. And yeah, just I like the heroic moments at the end of saving the president and everything, but that's, standard fare, I guess. And that's all of my direction. I want to just deal with the acting then, because I have quite a lot of notes about that. And, we can do it bit by bit because we can deal with each character. First of all, Shatner. Any thoughts about William Shatner from you? Sandy, we'll start with you because we haven't started with you for a while.
I thought he was really good. As all of my favorite parts were kind of delivered by him. He had these really pensive moments speaking to himself, and those were like his character arc moving forward. But in particular, right after the dinner, when he's realizing his own part and why that didn't go so well, and Romulan Ailes' part. And then the other one I really liked was when he and McCoy were in the bunk beds on Rua Pente. And, he's saying it never even occurred to me to take him at his word. Yeah. And I thought those were so well acted. And his let them die, finding out afterwards that, it was meant to be softened. I'm actually glad that choice was made for it not to be.
Exactly the same. Yeah, I think I agree with Mayor on that one. I kind of like it hanging there because it shows the level of growth before the end of the movie that he's come from that point. And plus, he even gets it thrown back at him when Valeris says, "Let them die," you said, even though she wasn't at that scene, but I guess we have to presume she saw footage or something, I guess. I don't know.
In general, though, just the passionate and earnest way his lines were delivered, and how he pulled off his small comedic parts. I just thought he did really well.
Yeah, I really like the lifelong ambition line because I think that sums up Captain Kirk.
I think it's more the way it was delivered. It came across as quite panto, and I think throughout the majority of this film, Shatner gives a really kind of understated performance.
He really does, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everybody accuses Shatner of, scene chewing, and he can do that, yeah. But he is a bloody good actor when it's necessary, and for the majority of this, he is that kind of caliber of actor. So when he drops to that, Gurning must have been your lifelong ambition, it just comes across a little pantomime for me.
Yeah, that's how I felt about that.
It's not even supposed to be him, is it? But that's fair.
No, right, but it's still him.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Oh, you love that scene?
Yeah, I did.
Divided 50-50 on that one.
I'm 100% on all of them.
Oh, that's funny. I thought it was funny that they rolled over McCoy when they were rolling around on the ground. Of course, that was funny. But I think I like Kirk in the very, very beginning when he's confronting Spock about basically, how dare you speak for me about this? I thought that Shatner did well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, DK?
As I said, I just think he gives it for the 99% of this film. He gives an incredibly understated performance, and I would kind of agree but disagree. I don't think it's understated. I think it's actually standout good because I've noted a lot of lines where I was like, "This isn't." This isn't underplayed. It's actually really powerful. But it's like how I always say about kind of related to what you were saying. People mock Shatner's acting and his delivery, but there are moments that hit you like a gut punch. And one of them that I've always said is the end of Star Trek 3 when he realizes that David's been killed. And it's like, "You Klingon bastard, you killed my son," and with the actual pain that's in his voice. And I get a lot of lines like that. So we already mentioned like the "let them die" or the log entry about not trusting Klingons because of the loss of his son. Or this is such a really, you might not even have noticed this, but the moment when Chang basically threatens to blow them out of the stars and they're charging up their plasma disruptor thing or whatever, and Kirk just says, "Signal our surrender," and they all go, "Captain," and he's like, "We surrender!" And it's just that sheer, wow, where did this performance come from? Moving to the next one then, obviously we have to touch on, we've done William Shatner as Kirk. What about Leonard Nimoy as Spock in this movie? Who wants to go first? I'm going to throw it open to you.
I'll go.
Okay.
I think it was great. I love the really, really serious Spock, emotional Spock, because this was, basically he and his father, had to go do this to meet with them and everything. And I just think that he stood out in this one.
Yeah, definitely. What about you then, DK? You still with us?
I'm gonna just go. I mean, I know we're gonna go from like Leonard onwards, but I've just got to say there isn't one member of the original cast here that doesn't knock it out of the park.
I don't touch on all of them because we'd be here all day and effectively said the same thing. Like,
I just think
they're great.
They've grown into their roles over 20 odd years before this film, and this is the one where yes, they've been great in pretty much most of the movies, but this is the one where, as we said earlier, you can trust them to inhabit the roles, and they do. And to me, you can't second guess any of this because I just think each one it's just a blinding performance from them all.
Yeah, and I'll get it out of the way now and just say that Nichelle Nichols, James Stewart, and Walter Koenig, the only criticism that I have is that they're not used enough. Because what they do get is fantastic, and they knock every scene, as you said, out of the park that they are given. So what can you do about the...
But again, compare it to the previous movie, and it's like having their own half-hour series.
Yeah, true. That's a good point, actually. But no, so what did you think generally, specifically about Spock's role in this movie, though? Because he's kind of... He's grown a lot in these 6 movies, if you look on them as a whole, particularly more than anyone, perhaps. He's been dead and back to life.
Yeah, and you've got to think also as well that back then he was, really good mates with Shatner. So that scene in his quarters where they're discussing about, I jump in where angels' feet are tread and all that kind of thing. I just think it's not necessarily just Spock and Kirk by this point. It's Nimoy and Shatner. And that comes through beautifully. And you just can't help but love this pairing.
Definitely. DK, is it possible that we two, you and I, have grown so old and so inflexible that we have outlived our usefulness? Would that constitute...
Don't crucify yourself, man.
I wrote that down because that's such a powerful... And as you said, it's kind of... It almost operates on the second level of, is it the actors as well? And... when you look at the way, like this, I did want to bring this up, even though it's only tangentially relevant. But when you look at the way pop culture was viewing them, I'm thinking specifically of The Simpsons, Star Trek 12, So Very Tired.
Yeah.
to actually kind of address that in this movie is like, are we that joke? Are we too old for this now?
Yeah, but it does take it head on. It doesn't shy away from it. To some extent, they kind of did it in Trek 2. As well, where he said, galloping around the cosmos is a game for the young, and Uhura says, what's that supposed to mean? So since then, you've had several sequels, so you can kind of see why it was heading that way in pop culture. So for him to tackle it again head on and just say, look, we are aware of what's going on here. This is how we're going to address it. I do love that.
Yeah, I agree as well. What did I ask you, Sandy, on your thoughts on Nimoy as Spock?
I just really thought, this was kind of his movie as much as Shatner's, as much as Shatner tended to headline anything that had to do with the original series. And I really liked how complex his character was, and that he played the character very complex, even though he was championing peace and trust. He slapped that tracer on Shatner as he left, and he knew really the reality of what they were facing. And I just thought just very complex acting showed through what, along with that character. That was really good.
Absolutely. I only have one note other than what I've mentioned, because I've mentioned I love the anger outburst. I don't love the Valera stuff, but like you, I like that he's kind of like on top of things and places the tracker and everything. But the only other note that I have is it's kind of a beautiful summation of his journey as Spock when he speaks to Valeris and says, it's taken me a lifetime to learn. Logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end. And I was like, that is such a perfect one-line summation of just what Spock has been heading towards for, at this point, decades, And I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. I totally get it as well. And it's a shame that we don't see much more of this particularly more balanced Spock, I guess, where he's like, you have to admit that there's flaws in Vulcan and human and acknowledge both sides. And it was a nice way to address that.
Especially coming off of the latest season of Strange New Worlds.
Oh, completely. I mean, Strange New Worlds is doing wonders at building up the before part of that. They're like, I'm going to try the Vulcan side of things. But I think the movies, I love that, like I said, that the movies are just Spock's journey from, being given command, to death, to rebirth, to full acceptance of everything that he is. But no,
And while Kirk,
regardless.
it's just him getting demoted over and over again.
Well, Kirk's journey is Kirk's own journey. I mean, Kirk's journey is, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a bureaucrat, I'm not an office desk guy or whatever. I am captain of a starship, and I think, as much as you may well scoff, I really do like that line in Generations when Kirk's like, "Don't let them take you off the bridge of a ship. When you're there, you make a difference."
Oh no,
I think
get
that's
it.
Kirk's journey, is basically just you were where you were meant to be the whole time. But you have to, accept the future as well. You can't just be, you can't just be lodged in the past. But even this movie has moments of like, you've got to be more flexible, even at the trial when he's like, yes, at times I've, went against orders. Or like Out of Space Dock when he insists on Valeris using thrusters, even though it's supposed to be impulse only or the other way around, whatever it is. And I'm like, this scene only exists to point out that like Kirk's still a badass, doesn't give a dang about orders or whatever. But yeah, it's just he is what he is, really, and he gets to be the hero, I think, because he grows. Because it would be a completely different character if he was like John Wayne that doesn't have a place in this growing world anymore. But the fact that he actually grows to accept, things can change and we have to live in this brave new world. I kind of like that. But anyway, I'm talking too much. So
No, I'll agree though.
Yeah, I agree.
Fair enough. What do you guys make of the finally promoted Captain Sulu of the Excelsior, played by George Takei? There's not much here, admittedly. There's more in the Voyager episode that he gets later. But what do you make of the little appearance there? Sandy.
Happy to see that he has his own command, as jarring as it is to see, though. Definitely see him as being more like he was doing a survey. He's definitely more the science and exploratory arm of Star Trek as opposed to Starfleet, as opposed to the militaristic one. Yeah,
but it's like DK was saying, that sense of familiar. We know the character enough that when we see him, and even seeing that like Rand is his communications officer, we see them on their own ship, and we just get, or I at least get a sense of like, oh,
yeah.
It's just comfy and cozy.
You are familiar with it, but it would stretch credibility to not have any of them move on at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will say, in terms of like particular impact, it's so powerful when
Captain Sulu, as much to the crew of the Enterprise, I owe you my thanks.
Nice to see you in action one more time, Captain Kirk. Take care.
I just love that exchange. It's so well acted between the two of them, especially considering they hate each other. You know what I mean? Sorry, Adrienne, you were saying.
Well, I thought the standout scene for me with him, besides, how they set up the whole Praxis explosion, was when, of course, the fact that the trial is broadcast to everybody. And at the key scene when Sulu says, "Send to Commander Enterprise."
We stand ready to
like
assist.
We're here to help you, but like he knows he's speaking to Spock. So I mean, that's because he knows how everything would go. So he played that integral part. I thought he did great.
Oh, there's a lot there. I mean, in such a little amount, even fly her apart because he's desperate to get back, or
that's his family.
Even by talking to us, you could be court-martialed. I can't understand, sir. You're breaking up.
That's our Sulu. That's our guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm very aware of time, so just any thoughts generally about any of the guest cast or anybody else that you wanted to kind of bring up? DK, we'll start with you.
Plummer, obviously. If anybody's going to be chewing the scenery in this, it's Plummer. But it's never to the point of absurdity. I think you can buy it. He does go really far into the character, but you just get the impression the guy's having fun.
Yeah, but not at the expense of the material. It's not like he's mocking Star Trek. He's just having fun with the role he's got. Yeah, fair enough. I want to mention quickly David Warner as Gorkon, because it always surprises me how little screen time he gets, because his impact, I think, is throughout this film. And I've been a fan of him as an actor way beyond this role in many other things. But definitely. I think it's just incredible to me that he sells me on, like, it's a tough act to sell you when Gorkon is like a Klingon who for the first time is like, got to be trustworthy and is out for peace. And I fully believe in him. And like you say, you can see why this character is so revered because of the way he's played. And when you look at the difference between this character and like Gul Madred and how utterly terrifying and detestable that character is, and then you tell me that's the same actor, I'm just
incredible.
like, that was talent. That was just sheer incredible actor.
I agree. Yeah,
Still
Gul
missing.
Madred. Wow. Yeah, same.
Yeah, still completely miss him. Yeah, I kind of have to bring it up because it is your current avatar, Adrienne. But did you have any thoughts on Rosanna de Soto as it were, and talking about the guest cast?
I actually do have a lot to say about her. She has some of my favorite lines in the whole thing, but I think we'll get to that later, right? Favorite character?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
no problem.
I want to give a shout out to John Shuck. It was nice to see the ambassador turn up again. And like Kirk, he kind of seemed to have a mini. I mean, obviously, it wasn't blatant, but he seemed to have an arc because he was one of the ones applauding Kirk at the end.
Absolutely, yeah. There is a couple of minor things like that because there's also obviously Michael Dorn that we haven't mentioned, who I think does a surprisingly good job as like the lawyer Worf. And who was it? Oh, yeah, Mark Leonard is in this. Believe it or not, you really can take a drink when you spot him because he gets one very brief scene, but it's good. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, again, underused. So yeah, DK, do you want to lead us quickly through any special effects, music, and sound thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'll start off with the sound design. Does anyone have any notes with regards to sound design or the soundtrack? From what I can gather, I mean, I looked into it. He wanted Holst's entire suite for the film, but apparently it cost far too much in royalties and just could not be asked to edit it in. He then asked James Horner, who did, obviously Trek 2 and Trek 3, but Horner said his career had outgrown Star Trek by this point and so turned it down. He then went to Jerry Goldsmith, and Jerry Goldsmith said, look at Star Trek 5, you can go screw yourself. So, yeah, he put out asking for demo tapes to be submitted, held auditions, and Cliff Idleman, who up until then was unknown, got the part because of it kind of alluded towards Holst the Planet, again with Horner and Goldsmith in there, while still sounding fresh and original, apparently. So, yeah.
I think it's probably my least favorite of the movie soundtracks. And
over Trek 4.
Star Trek 4 has moments. That first track that's meant to be based on Mars from the planets sounds exactly like the Batman theme by Danny Elfman.
It does have touches to it, yeah.
I was just going to mention that it was awesome. He's only 26. And I think that the Rura Penthe escape scene when they're walking across the glacier, that music is just stunning.
It's really haunting, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's really good stuff.
There was one sound design choice that I thought was really interesting enough to write it down. And that was from the very beginning of the movie when they just, finished their survey and the shockwave is coming towards them. And Sulu says, shields. And then bap, when it hits the sound, when the sound wave hits the ship, it was very contrary to how when waves typically hit ships in Star Trek, where it's more of a slower process and not like a singular pop at them. So I thought that sound design choice was very interesting.
Yeah, that scene in the cinema just blew you away. What about special effects? Anybody got any notes on the effects on this?
Well, you guys already talked about the blood, the Klingon blood, but I particularly like the part with the Klingon blood where Gorkon is twirling and the blood is kind of trailing him as he's going in a circle. I just thought that was kind of cool. It's something I remember about the movie.
I have one effect that I haven't mentioned yet that I wanted to note, which is I love how the front of the bird of prey becomes slightly visible as it's lit up by the firing plasma thing, because it's like cloaked, obviously.
I think the only thing that doesn't impress me as much is that the bird of prey, as you mentioned it, when it explodes at the end, and I do get kind of a model kit vibe from it. But apparently they found it so good they just reused it again and again and again during the course of Trek.
Ships being destroyed, yeah, exactly. Well, I will say you can get your drink ready because it does look impressive in 4K at least.
Oh, God.
So you've seen one
That's
bird of
funny.
prey destroyed. You've seen them all.
Quite literally.
Mhm.
That's funny.
There we go. We'll jump into our favourite character, moment, and line from the movie. Adrienne, again, I'll go counterclockwise for no given reason other than I just looked up and there you were. So who's your favourite
There I
character in the movie?
Okay. My favorite character, I just can't get over her, is Ozette Bohr. I think she is just incredible. To me, her Klingon, when she's just talking to her guys and before Chang is rude, that's the best. That's the best spoken Klingon. Her lines where she's talking about how, about the war and stuff. And I still think that my favorite is where she, I still think that's her Klingon is the best Klingon spoken language, but where she says, we will not extradite the prisoners and you will make no attempts to rescue them in a military operation. We would consider any attempt an act of war. I mean, that little pause that Rosanna DeSoto gives is just so good. So I give it to her. Way to go, Ozette Bohr. I wish I had a action figure of you, but I could never find it.
Oh, that's a shame. What about you, Sandy? Who's your favorite character?
My favorite character in this is Spock. Just because he's my favorite all-around character. I just couldn't have eyes for anybody else in this. One of my favorite lines of his is something we've already alluded to. An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I just always like that, even when it's repeated later in the Abrams films, and just really have always liked that line. But my favorite scene of his is when actually something that looks really dumb to have done, but when Varys shows Chekhov why they couldn't just vaporize them, that and she pulls out a gun and vaporizes a pot, which was like totally unnecessary. She could have just told him that. But as the characters ran in to investigate what happened, which Uhura did it the dumbest, like she came in front of the security guys instead of behind them, but how Spock just kind of grabbed each of them and folded them in as they arrived in the room, Uhura, Chekhov, and then just started rolling his plan along.
Okay. What about you, DK? It's
such a difficult one, this. It flits between Shatner as Kirk and Nimoy as Spock, but I think I'm going to have to go with Spock as well. The entire thing kind of rests on his shoulders. He kind of sets up the premise. He's the head of the whodunnit section, and I just think again, it all comes down to that scene between him and Kirk in his quarters again for me. And it's going to have to be Spock.
Okay. Mine should have probably been Spock. Like I say, he's my favorite character in all of Trek, but for me, I think unfortunately the kind of mind meld thing just kind of spoils the love of that character in this film. And in the end, I had to go with Kirk, which surprised even me, because I think, not quite aside from that fact of the kind of Spock, not acquitting himself well, I think I love the way that Kirk actually shows growth in real time. Like, you actually see that in a way that it's rare that heroic characters get to do, so that by the end of the film, he criticizes himself at the start and, points out how wrong he was. I love that. It's a bit of depth. So, Kirk for me. And as I said, Shatner's performance, I think, is quite very good. So, what would be your favorite moment in the film, Adrienne?
Okay, favorite moment. Cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war. That's gonna just be it.
Chang just quoting
spinning in the chair and just thinking he's got it all going on, and then he doesn't have it all going on. Just what happens with him, how he stares at the camera when he sees the torpedo coming and everything. I just think that's great. So I'm going to give that
To
whole
be
yeah.
or not.
Yeah, because whenever I hear the Cry Havoc stuff, it's only ever in his voice. So, like, no matter who says it or if I think it or everything, it's only Christopher Plummer. So that would be the moment.
What about you, Sandy? Who's your favorite moment? Sorry, in the film.
I think oddly, it's not even much acting, but just their arrival on Rura Pente. I liked that we were seeing more of the Star Trek world, that we were on an asteroid that had an atmosphere, and all we learned about it, the prison scene. I just, even if kind of tropey, I just really liked that entire bit.
Cool. And what about you then, GK? Favorite moment?
As heartbreaking as it is, it's got to be that, and it's also my favorite line. The if I were human, heading captain, second star to the right, straight until morning. That entire scene, it breaks my heart because I'm saying goodbye to these characters, but I love it.
Yeah, that final captain's log is very emotional, but yeah, fair enough. My favorite moment is just the incredibly satisfying two-way attack on the revealed bird of prey with the Enterprise and Excelsior just firing torpedoes, working together. I love that.
Oh yeah, that's cool. They gang up on him. I have to correct my Shakespeare. It is Cry Havoc and let slip the dogs of war. So forgive
that's
my
what
little...
I heard. I didn't.
Oh well, forgive my little slip up.
Fair enough. So we've had your favorite line then, DK, which would be what, Spock's "If I Were Human," I think.
Pretty much that bit, and
second star to the right. And straight on till morning.
Adrienne, what would be your favorite line?
Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war.
Fair enough. Sandy, what about you?
My favorite line would have probably also been the...
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
My favorite line, I'm just a big softy at heart, and it did bring a lump to my throat, but my favorite line is,
"You've restored my father's faith.
And you've restored my son's."
I love that little exchange.
Yeah, that's a really sweet moment. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so chaotic before then. Nobody knows what's going on, and my Ozat board is all confused. So, yeah.
And it just, again, it builds on knowing what these characters have been through and having watched the movies, particularly because I get affected by the death of David in Star Trek 3. But anyway, moving on to the next part. This will be time then to jump into our audience response section. It's probably going to be a fair while because we've got a whopper, as I say, of an audience response section. So just so that you're not listening to one voice droning on for the entire time, I have split up the audience response on this one. Let me just say thank you so much to everyone who chimed in with your thoughts on this, particularly everybody in the Facebook groups. We're going to each take a little bit of the response that I was able to gather and break down to. Let's see. I'll probably start because why not, and then we'll take it clockwise from there so that it can be DK, then Sandra, then finish with Adrienne. So yeah, I will say all of this feedback comes from either Facebook groups or a handful of it comes from whatever the artist formerly known as Twitter is calling itself this week. But no, not that much from there, mainly Facebook. So again, I'll start and I'll say that Paul de Maria Mañas says 4.5, second best Star Trek film, absolute classic. I should clarify, I asked what you thought of the movie and also what you would rate it out of 5 stars, which is why I got that response. Donald Salisbury says, this is 5 out of 5 stars for me. This and First Contact are my top 2, although Wrath of Khan is a nostalgic favourite as well. Nicholas Forrestal says, for me, Undiscovered Country and Wrath of Khan are my 2 favourite Kirk-era Star Trek movies, and Brian Stebb simply says, agreed. Kevin Carlson says, it's my 3rd favourite Star Trek movie after The Wrath of Khan and First Contact. I'd rate it 4 or 4.5 stars out of 5. For me, the reason I don't rate it as 5 stars is because of the scenes on Rura Pente and the more missed-than-hit humour throughout the movie. Disagreement there, but okay, fair enough. So that's my all of my feedback that I've got, the extent of mine. So DK, well, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, first one I've got is at PM Martin 1867. I presume that's on Shitter. He says it's hands down the best of the original series films. The story is straightforward without being boring or predictable. The tension builds in a very satisfying way. The cinematography is on point, and he's uppercase though, so he really believes that. The music is solid, and then he's put in brackets in my head right now. And Christopher Plummer. Now over on Facebook, Garak Mike Schmidt says incredible film, and he's got the number 7. I'm guessing that's out of 5. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a few people did that. Yeah.
John Wheeler says excellent movie, very good politics, polemic. Everyone did it. The Federation, the Klingons, the Romulans, but the Enterprise sorted them out. Glenn Saville says, I'm not a fan of the Star Trek movies other than The Wrath of Khan and the reboots. Mostly watch them for nostalgia effect. And Jeremiah Sappingfield says 4 out of 5. Kenneth Thompson gives it a 5. And Dave Hope rounds it off with Justice for Chancellor Gorkon. So, yeah, over to you, Sandy.
All right. I have several opinions here. The first one is from John Salcido. He gives it a 4 out of 5 stars. Davin Scalehorn, he gives it a 6 out of 5 stars. So another person that's just got it off the charts. Seems appropriate, and it is that good, was his reasoning for that. Field de Breer says 2.5 on a good day, which just appalled and surprised us, but didn't get much elaboration beyond that.
I think we need a hot take award for that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Braylon Lee Schluter II says, it's a safe 4.5 for me. I love the movie and I've watched it multiple times, and it is still entertaining each time I watch. Was it the best of all time? No. But it's still a damn good and a fitting farewell to the OG cast. Derek John Alderson. On a scale of motion picture to First Contact, I'd place it around Insurrection, which
what does that mean?
Pretty subjective one there. I think Insurrection was mostly ill received, so I think he's one of the 2.5 star guys. But that's just a guess. Paul Spriggs says it was okay-ish, I suppose. He feels the fact that 5 was so awful, it made this one look so much better. Matt Link says a great conclusion to the original film series. Not as epic as Wrath of Khan, but a great last adventure with the crew. The theme of post-Cold War mentality, fear of change, and the unknown. Plus Sulu and the Excelsior. Good stuff. Thomas Labinik says, great send-off for the original crew, and he gives it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And that's all I have to.
And Adrienne, you're going to round us off then with the last bit of feedback.
Okay, we've got Seknarf Tenrub saying, it's 5 stars, love this movie. Thomas Janik says, my favorite of the classic cast, absolutely love this movie. Jim Wood says, 5 stars from me, my favorite Trek movie. Victoria Marino, 5 out of 5. My favorite Trek movie, love it. It has action, adventure, redemption, tie-in storyline, and the best of all, it has a good amount of humor. Ariel Vitali says 4 out of 5. The galley scene and the Uhura book scene still just rub me the wrong way, even after all these years. And then here's Larry Jones, who gives it a 1. And then some suspicious character named Michael Wilson reaches out and says, Larry, can I ask you why you didn't like it? So Larry responds, I didn't like the story. I thought the original cast was past their prime. It was very forgettable to me.
I think that's the hot take award.
Yeah, I'm going to concur with that one.
Yeah. And those are mine. That's it.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus, I think, that it's at least in the top 3 for pretty much everyone, apart from the odd, hot take outlier there. We shall see if our little crew of reviewers here match the consensus or are wildly out of touch. So is it? Shall we go to you, Adrienne, first for your conclusion and your score?
Okay, well, this is probably the Star Trek movie of the original series of which I have watched the most. I watched it a lot. I had the VHS cassette tapes when I was living on the island of Crete, and I used to watch them, and there was no internet back then. So it's one of my favorites.
Adrienne, are you secretly a super spy? You've been everywhere.
Thank you, United States Navy. So I'm going to give this a 4.3. It's just a great one, and I really love it. So that's my score.
Cool. Sandy, what about you?
I really did like this movie a lot, and it was so well-rounded for me. It had good acting, very poignant moments. It was very clear that the movie was saying something without saying something, and there were so many levels of that, because I usually don't get a lot of those things, but it was done in such a way that we were, led to this, underlying meaning. I really like that. That boosted it a lot for me, and that use of allegory and Shakespeare. And also it had good dialogue, which I feel like I'm very picky on, actually. But the dialogue was really good. So for me, I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Ooh, surprisingly rounded up for you, but okay. DK, what about you then, mate?
Okay, I've got... this is the movie that Star Trek V should have been. We were waiting for the actual showdown promised in The Voyage Home, and finally this was it. A fantastic, and at the time relevant premise, a multi-layered story, brilliant performances across the board, aliens, callbacks from previous movies and TV episodes, ship battles, and Iman. The gang couldn't have picked a better tale to go out with, and that ending, brings a lump to my throat every time. If I'm being honest, it isn't perfect. It's not quite as good as Wrath of Khan, in my opinion, but only in the same way that a lottery win is not quite as good as Wrath of Khan, in my opinion. And I'm going to give it 4.9.
Ooh, wow, okay. That is, very surprising, but... yeah, okay. I said just a fantastic movie, a truly fitting send-off to the iconic crew, and both a wonderful representation of the world at the time it was made, as well as a frustratingly still timely theme and messaging. In other words, it's great science fiction doing what the genre does best. As I get older, I appreciate the underlying themes even more. Could there be a better summation of the famous Trek ideal than showing that even though it's scary watching the world change, it's better to embrace that than become bitter and twisted? Kirk grows so much, and it's astounding to me that there are people, especially Trek fans in this world, that don't get this key point. Aside from that, though, it's a perfectly paced film. I'd argue there isn't really a wasted minute, and it all flows along so smoothly. Every scene is a delight to live in, rather than a stepping stone to something else. Its focus on the characters is commendable and so good, but not perfect. As mentioned, the treatment of Uhura is silly, and Spock's forced mind meld leaves a very bad taste, even if we ignore the metaphorical implications. That said, there is just so much here that hits my heart and soul. I can quote huge chunks of the quality dialogue. Every single part is acted to perfection, and it even has time to occasionally be really funny. I can't say it's perfect for the reasons that I've said, but I really do think it's better than a 4.5 score. So I'm going to do something you'll almost never see me do and pull a Sandy on this one. And I said 4.7 out of 5.
Do you know, I was going to say I'm pulling a Sandy.
Yeah. The ironic thing is, only Sandy gave us a rounded up score.
It just didn't even occur to me you couldn't even do that. I like being a trendsetter, though. That's unique.
The weird thing is as well that when you add that together and divide it by 4 to come up with an average, it comes to an exact average, which almost never happens. It's always like a long point number. So I can say that officially, according to our podcast review team here, Star Trek 60 Undiscovered Country gets 4.6 out of 5. On the nose, on the bund of 4.6. So, yeah, huge hit, obviously. So, yeah, very good. Hopefully you agree with us. Always catch our information in the episode description, all of our link trees to find us on social media. There will be links there to help out with the ongoing SAG-AFTRA strikes. And you can always donate to us via our coffee page if you wanted to, contribute towards the cost of the podcast. Keep it running and make sure we're still going to be here if you've been enjoying it. And again, just do spread the word, like, subscribe, share it with your friends.
I'll be back.
Captain's log, stardate 9529.1. This is the final cruise of the Starship Enterprise under my command. This ship and her history will shortly become the care of another crew. To them and their posterity will we commit our future. They will continue the voyages we have begun and journey to all the undiscovered countries, boldly going where no man, where no one has gone before.
You have been listening to the Silver Screen Podcast, hosted by Michael Wilson and DK. Created, produced, and edited by Michael Wilson. Behind the scenes sections and additional material produced by DK. Music by Timeless Journey. More information can be found at soundcloud.com/Timeless Journey. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Silver Screen Podcast, or look for the Silver Screen Podcast under Facebook groups. Links to all our social media accounts and more are in this episode's description. This podcast is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Just look for Silver Screen, Hit or Miss Star Trek. This has been a Mike's Podcast production. Copyright 2022. Thank you for listening.